But really what you want to talk about is forecasting. So what I'm going to do is have a little bit of a discussion about art versus science, my views on the forecasting challenges that companies have, different approaches and things to consider when you're doing forecasting, and then a series of pros and cons. Of course, a lot of this is just the way that I think, honestly, and challenges I've seen in our own company and other companies that we've worked with, and dependencies on the accuracy of forecasting. And then we'll wrap it up and open it up for questions. So in my view, forecasting is something that, it is definitely math and a science activity, but it is partially art. And in that fact that it's art, you're sort of having to guess at things. What's coming, what's happening, what do I feel is going to occur in the organization. Very much like project management. There's a way to do project management, then there's the gut feel that comes with being a project manager on whether there's a risk that's going to turn into an issue or something. So it's not only an art, though, it is a science. And the science of it is, X times Y equals Z. Hours times bill rate equals money. Forecasting hours, forecasting money. Forecasting milestone completion, forecasting money. So there is definitely a science to it. But the science is, checking to make sure, the science is very much dependent on inputs, and those inputs tend to be in art form, in my view. So some questions that often come up when we're dealing with the art piece of it. When I talk about art, what do I mean? And these are what I call art questions. When is the work going to be done? Okay, that is something that you can plan a target date. And they use the word target for a reason. So when do you expect the work to be done? How do you expect the work to get delivered? And that's very much the best laid plans type scenario. Are there any risks that you are aware of that could impact the schedule or the budget, which means you could slip things out? And slipping out schedules certainly would impact your forecast of your revenue. Having any kind of out-of-scope items come into scope would potentially impact your budget and increase your forecast. So are any of those known items in advance when you're starting an engagement that your project manager would be able to give you insight into? How much effort do we need from our billable resources? So a project that's 56 hours long does not necessarily mean you can deliver it in 7 days. That's somebody full-time, no other distractions, 8 hours a day on a 40-hour work week, getting it done. Oftentimes we have to use that, the man-month or the person-month metric, which is productive time is 6 hours a day out of an 8-hour day, so therefore 56 hours may take a little closer to 10 days to finish. So it's all very much an estimate of when things will happen. How many other things are going to be going on in parallel? So if you have the fortunate situation of being able to dedicate teams to projects and that project is focused on just that person, I'm very jealous of you. So most kinds, people are juggling. They're multitasking. They're having 1 or 2, 3, 4 different projects. And with that comes some trade-offs on also productivity, because now if one project has an escalation or an issue that's come up that may impact the other project, and therefore now you're dealing with the juggling of scheduling. All of this is the type of stuff we talked about in our previous series, Resource Management. They're all things that impact resource scheduling, and you'll see that scheduling, in my view, is very much a part of forecasting. And then, of course, the big question is who's going to actually do the work. Forecasting from a revenue and a money earning perspective, for some of you also it comes along with when do I expect to burn the cost. You may have a cost earning model, and the more expensive resources means you'll earn it faster. If the less expensive resources, means you'll earn it slower. But if you need to go out and get a contractor, you may be able to get your revenue, but now you're hitting your margin. So all of this kind of goes together in the art of planning to figure out how the scheduling is going to work out and impact your forecast. Now, the science part of it, it's more concrete, more objective. It's things like, what is my bill rate? It should be part of your pricing model. It should be part of your SOW. And if you have a fixed fee situation, at least you came up with some kind of bill rate to leverage a final number that you came up with. So at some point there's a money value associated with something, and that's sort of, that's the objective. That's the science part of it. What is your revenue policy? So forecasting revenue is very much dependent on how you actually recognize revenue. That may be kind of a silly statement to make, but if you are a revenue-based company where you're a cash basis company, okay, like that's a small, like TopStep is a cash basis company, I have a very hard time forecasting revenue because I have to forecast based on my payment terms according to when I send my invoices out, and that's not necessarily an easy thing to forecast. And of course, people sometimes get delayed on their payments, and so now I'm at risk for things like that. If you're doing more of an accrual basis, maybe you have a little bit easier forecast. But now if you do something like a milestone or percent complete, you're dependent on your PMs heavily, and we'll get into those pros and cons. A simple question like how many hours are in a workday? So if you expect a 56-hour project to start off and somebody's dedicated to it full time, then your revenue forecast would be 7 days. 7 times 8, 56. But we know that the scheduling of people and the productivity of people may not do that math very simply. So you may have to factor in that a workday, even though it's 8 hours, there's only 6 hours of productivity. What's the budget for the project? What's the total funding budget? So that you have some kind of way to forecast and cap effort if there is such a thing as a cap. Especially when you're doing some kind of fixed fee type project, you want to be able to do a earned revenue according to that fixed fee value. If it's a T&M, you probably have an expectation of what the budget amount should be. It may not be a hard cap, but whenever somebody sees a dollar value on a piece of paper, they would assume that actually is what it's going to cost. So that would be something that I would keep in mind as far as caps and trying to estimate around that budget amount. And finally, how much is each deliverable worth in the SOW? So as you build out your SOWs, how are you breaking information down so that the PM not only can deliver and make sure they're on track, but also how the revenue would be earned and the expected scheduling would occur in that activity. So if you have a deliverable-based project, that deliverable is $10,000. I can forecast this $10,000 when I expect this to close. So the art of the schedule plus the science of the $10,000 gives you your forecast of the $10,000. Okay. And none of these are probably a surprise to you, but if you think in terms of art versus science, some things are very easy to say, yep, it's this. And other things are like, well, I feel like it's going to be that. And there's the feel part of it is where all the maintenance comes in when you're trying to maintain the accuracy of your forecast. Now, the forecasting, I would argue, also has to line up with your revenue policy. So if you're a T&M shop, for example, a lot of your revenue forecasting can be completely tied to how you send out your invoices, like an as-delivered revenue model. I bill you for 5 hours, I get to recognize 5 hours. It could also be one of those prepaid situations where I bill you for 100 hours, but I only work 10 so I can earn 10. A little bit of an earned hours type thing based on prepaid situations. If you have more fixed fee type stuff, you may fall into more of the percent complete or the percent cost complete revenue models. And here you're trying to understand what is the total effort that's going to be required to do this work, and what is the effort that you have expended that you can count as earning the revenue to compute a percent complete, which would give you a percent of revenue for that project. And the cost complete model is really a lower level from an hours perspective. If somebody costs $100 an hour and somebody else costs $50, I can get more hours out of the $50 an hour person and earn the revenue slower than I can with a more expensive resource. I have to use less hours, but I can earn the revenue faster with them. Okay. Milestone revenue, I don't see this as often anymore with some of the revenue requirement changes out there with the 606 and stuff, but the The milestone and earn value is another way where your milestone to me feels a little bit more like a roller coaster depending on how you set up your milestones. Fixed fee projects, if you can set up a milestone per month, then at least you have something that's forecasting every month. But if you have more of a, I can recognize 50 at the beginning of the project and 50% at the end of the project, and that end of the project keeps slipping and slipping and slipping, that could be a huge bump in your forecast activity because you're very dependent on when is that going to close. Okay. One of the more fun ones I think are the subscription or the amortized schedules where this is more like license models or hosting models or models where there's some kind of upfront payment but you recognize it over time. So like in our virtual admin offering, we have an opportunity for customers to pay for something in advance for a year, but we actually can only recognize the revenue at once a month for the 12 months they're subscribed to that offering. So I recognize that over a longer period of time, but I've gotten the money from an initial invoice. And finally, the cash basis, which I think is a difficult model to forecast in some of the technologies that we work with because of the lag with the payment terms. Okay. So based on the way that you do your revenue policy, you have to factor in, okay, so how do I earn revenue, and then how can I plan to earn revenue? And with that comes a few different approaches on how you can plan to earn revenue, therefore coming up with your forecast. And kind of going from science down to art, the science part of it is like a bottom-up approach. The bottom-up approach very much takes the Jody's working on this project for 7 hours next Tuesday at this rate. So A times B times C equals D, and D is my forecast for next Tuesday for those 8 hours. That bottoms-up calculation can give you very accurate information, but it also requires that you keep all of the components that are multiplying together and adding together and such very accurate. So the bottom-up calculation relies for T&M customers very heavily on resource scheduling, the accuracy of scheduling, the accuracy of the way that you have your bill rates set up, and any cap consideration, and making sure that you have a validation of all the setup to get your forecast out versus computing it on the fly. Okay. A run rate, I do see run rate quite often. Run rate is more of a, hey, as I expect these people to put hours, as I expect the hours to go in, I'm going to estimate the earning of revenue. Okay, sort of like bottoms up, but it may not be as accurate because you could be using sort of a general run rate, like a back of the envelope. Hey, I think typically people are earning about $150 an hour, $150 an hour based on this plan of hours, and we should get about this much money. Or companies that have been running their organization for a long time, I'll be in conversations and I'll hear, well, I typically expect us to burn $800,000 a month. So if I don't see a number on my forecast come out at $800,000 a month, I'm immediately doing research to find out what's set up wrong in my system. Okay, which is actually quite interesting, I think, because you've got a gut feel. So it's kind of a gut feel forecast, and the run rate is what you're using to confirm your gut feel. And of course, as the actuals come out, you're having to double check and make sure your run rate looks like it's something that's realistic. Now, the straight line forecast is an interesting one because straight line is sort of it's a really simple method. The straight line is I'm going to start in January, I'm going to finish in December, and it's $120,000. So I'm going to say, well, I'm going to peanut butter spread it, $10,000 a month, and that's what I'm going to earn. As you can guess, that really just sort of it's more of a money factor. Like here, am I going to get the money to come in the door? It's not really dependent on when the resources are going to do the work. So it's very simple. It does give some forecasting information, but it may not be tied directly to what's going on in the organization. And then there's the pure art one, which is ad hoc. You know what? This $120,000 project, I think we can get it done in, 5 months. And I'm just going to take the hours and go 70, 20, 10, 5, whatever that comes out to be. So I'm just going to throw the numbers there, and that's what I'm going to forecast. Okay. I don't see that as much as delivery from a forecast perspective, I see that more as like a sales, like a gut feel for sales. I think it's fine for sales, but I'm not the sales methodology person by any means. But that's that's really pure art. So you go from science all the way down to pure art because you really are relying on somebody coming up with a number and then being able to justify that number in some way based on information that they have in their head, perhaps. Okay. Now, what I've done is I've taken sort of a pro-cons approach to each of these methods, starting with the art option and going backwards into the science. Because really forecasting is a pure combination, and even the science one, the bottoms up, you'll find there's still some art factors into it. Now, the ad hoc forecast, I wouldn't say it's horrible, but you are, because you have the freedom to say, you know what, I think we're just going to pick up 7,500 this month. It's really what we're trending. That's what I think we're going to do. We're going to pick up 7,500. That's really somebody, you have to rely on somebody coming up with that number. So there's no dependency on scheduling. The person who's giving you the number has a general feel for how the project is being delivered or how the services team is delivering things. You're relying on that person, which may be the project manager or the account manager, to see, based on sort of number of people working on a project, I think we're going to get about 25K, that kind of thing. And I think it's useful for milestones because milestone, you may not want to maintain dates in a PSA tool, for example. On milestones, you just want to say, I'm thinking this milestone is going to close somewhere in August, so we're going to forecast $1 million in August. So it may not be terrible to use for milestones, but the cons are you are relying on people and their acumen to have a good estimate for your forecast. And in this model, I would really recommend doing a forecast of, forecast versus actuals comparison to see how accurate your forecast is based on that. If it's really accurate, then heck, keep going. But you do have to have someone justifying where the number's coming from. If I put $1 million forecasting in August, I've got to have a reason why I'm putting $1 million there. There's got to be something more than, well, it would be nice, that kind of thing. From a straight line perspective, I've worked with a few customers on this. I do use this partially in my own forecasting when it comes to early opportunity type planning. I expect this project, it's typically a 3-month project and it's this much money, so I'm just going to straight line forecast it from a forecasting perspective, but I haven't scheduled anyone to it, so it's really a low probability or maybe mid probability of close. So it's sort of something that I do with my pipeline to give me a factor into like an upside type forecast for revenue. It is very simple to do this kind of forecast. It's really just 2 dates, start date, end date, and then a spread of money across it. I think it's useful for amortized subscriptions because obviously that's sort of the same thing. It's not exactly the same thing because amortized is a specific amount over a period of time, over each period during that time frame. And a straight line forecast could be something that is very, very variable based on the length of a month. Some months are 4 months, some months are closer to 5 weeks, or some months are 4 weeks, some months are closer to 5 weeks, and that could impact how your sort of just peanut butter spread gets computed by your PSA. Okay. But it is not dependent on resource scheduling. So again, here you could be forecasting money, but you could be forecasting against somebody who doesn't exist yet. I expect that we will break into the Keurig brewer fix-it market, and I'm going to forecast $1 million, and I don't even have anyone with that skill set. So that is obviously a little bit of a fantasy forecast. So although it's not dependent on resource scheduling, the con is it's not dependent on resource scheduling. I see a lot of times the scheduling is a pro and a con in these forecast methods because the check and balance is not there. And if the check and balance is there, then there's an accuracy accountability that has to be factored in. Okay. Oftentimes the straight line forecast, because it's not based on people, it doesn't really have any kind of cost foundation. So you can't do sort of a straight line profitability type thing. You can put a guesstimate in there of margin that you computed for pricing, and that would essentially give you your cost, but it's really more of a money spread type forecast. And because it's across the timeline, it may not be the type of percent complete model that you want to forecast, where you're earning revenue very quickly up front based on all the upfront, front-loaded type work, and then it trickles off as the project falls into more of a maintenance mode, production support type situation. Now, run rate, this one and the next one, which is of course the bottom-up calculation, the run rate I've seen actually often, and the run rate is something that you can use it for forecasting, but I've also seen it used for sort of opportunity loss, like where are we at, almost like a realization type comparison. If we were able to get all of these hours billed at our target bill rate, this is the revenue we would be earning. Okay. When you do a run rate, you do have to, if you just do pure run rate saying, okay, I expect every hour that you work, you're going to earn $100, even though that may or may not be the bill rate, because you're dealing with fixed fee situations. You do have to factor in the fact that from a run rate perspective, if you're putting in that $100 an hour that you're forecasting out, it does actually have to hit a cap because you are dealing with a fixed fee situation. So it can't just be ad nauseum number of hours for a run rate. Because you can't recognize forecast revenue more than you could actually earn on the project. So your run rate forecast has to have some kind of cap logic associated with it. And the run rate, again, with a fixed fee, if you forecast all the hours up to a cap, then any hour after that starts eating into margin. So it could kind of show you that you're earning revenue, but you're not earning it as quickly as you really should be, or not, maybe you're earning it too fast, because in a percent complete model that would slow down based on the adjustment of the timeline as it's going forward. So run rate is kind of a trade-off. I have worked with some of you on the phone perhaps even on this calculation. So the cap is really the big thing that I see as a challenge when the run rate's coming in, especially if you're doing it in a fixed fee model. Okay. The other thing about the run rate is if you want to factor in things like non-billable time or overages. The cap is the overages, but how do I do run rates, but I don't want to include anything that's considered like shadow or duplicate work or redo customer sat type things. So there might be a little bit of finagling in what a run rate calculation is, because you're trying to exclude stuff that you're not expecting to actually count as earned hours. I think run rates are something that I've seen, like I said before, like it's a gut feel. I'll talk to a department manager, say, yeah, we should be earning about $800,000. We should be earning about $800,000 this month. That's what we typically do as a run rate, $800,000 a month. And if they don't see that at their total roll-up level, then they start breaking it down per project. So in run rates, I could see that actually at a department level often, at a user level often. Hey, I expect everyone that's a billable resource to earn about $20,000, $25,000 a month, and if they're not hitting that, then is it because I'm discounting? Is it because I'm not keeping them utilized? Is it because I've got basically we've hit caps and we're eating into margin, all that kind of stuff. Okay. Also with run rates, because you are using the magic run rate hourly number or something, you have to continually check to make sure you're using the right run rate. Otherwise, you'll say you're earning revenue faster in your forecast. And then finally, the bottom up. And the bottom up, I think, is the most accurate, but it's also the dangerous one that could be the most off base, because it is very heavily dependent on scheduling. And scheduling is, again, pro and con. If you make scheduling the core of your forecast, then that scheduling has to be accurate, and now you're pushing accountability down to the people who are doing the scheduling to say you are completely driving our forecast in the system. So there has to be a push down from an executive level, I think, for the forecast to be usable, for the forecast to be accurate, that people understand that the scheduling is not necessarily just because you're managing a project. It is actually completely tied to the expected and predictable performance of the company. Okay. But there is one thing that you have to keep in front of, especially if you're doing sort of planning of resources, but you're not sure who's going to do the work. So you do these placeholders or stubs or sort of generic type people. That can give you indication into how to do hiring. So there's lots of benefits to doing that. But the negative is if you have money hanging on those types of resources, and that's not a real resource, then that's revenue that also could be upside because you literally just don't have a person to fill that role. So if nobody does the work, you can't necessarily earn the revenue. So you have to keep an eye on that kind of stuff with the scheduling. You have great, accurate scheduling, but you're scheduling against phantom people. That's also not a good thing. So you'd have to make sure you're swapping those people out, getting those named resources in place to keep the scheduling accurate. Okay. So really with the forecasting, there's an art to it and a science to it. And the art a lot of times is related to the planning. It's related to the gut feel of things of when are we going to start, when are we going to end, how many hours of a day can I get out of people, and how productive can people be. But you also have to factor in from a forecasting perspective, I can't really forecast revenue if I earn it one way and I forecast it a different way. So there's sort of an apples to apples view that you have to look at. And it can be actually a quite accurate report forecasting. A lot of times in your PSA you have all the elements that you need to be able to do a very detailed and accurate forecasting. But you do have to have an accountability and a check and balance in keeping the data up to date and accurate. The system itself just can't be artificially intelligent, at least not yet, to fix your forecast. So keep that in mind as you're working through your forecast reports and your policies and procedures and ownership.